Well, we have a few minutes for comments, especially from Pat, should he wish to...
Well, I can't resist it.
I didn't think so.
You shouldn't resist.
Well, it's your prerogative.
Yes. Let's see. Do I need to stand up? My voice will carry it. Yeah. So, I actually find Michael's talk very congenial.
What's not tonight?
Absolutely. And I only wanted to make a couple of comments about my own aspects of my own career and the wonderful conversations I had with Carnap about, for example, the foundations of probability. I'm old enough now that it's a much bigger world than it was when I started in 1950. So I know a huge collection of people, for example, the physicists here at Stanford who are now gone, who were so important to the physics. I'm not gone. You weren't here. I'm talking to Lynn Seskin, our favorite string physics department. So my comment is that, I think that in a way, Michael made clear what I want to do is express some indebtedness here to people. I made clear my indebtedness to both Ernest Nagel, who was my mentor, and it took me a long time to realize he had really spoiled me as a graduate student. He was very much more attentive to me than I am practically ever attentive to graduate students, it seems to me. I feel guilty about that. So, and then I got a sort of new education, what used to be called the logic of the West, namely Tarski. And I was lucky. I had a very good relation with Alfred. Now, if you know Alfred, Alfred was very tough on students. So I had a more relaxed relation with him. I wasn't a student. I was very much his junior. And of course, when the phone would ring and he'd say, "It's Alfred," he called up to ask about something to see if I might do, and which I did whenever I could. But I learned a tremendous amount from Alfred and his students. And in fact, Dana, where are you? Well, for example, as a very beginning teacher of philosophy in 1952, what was his name? At that time, he was teaching that philosophy course. Can you remember, Dana? Anyway, the man teaching the philosophy of science at Berkeley unfortunately died just as the term started. And so they asked me to come over, and lo and behold, I had Dana Scott and Richard Montague as undergraduates. And they taught me much more than I taught them, I think. And furthermore, about every 2 sentences, they had to correct some minor error, I think. It was quite an experience with both Dana and Richard. Now, the really big-time experience I had in this class was something not mentioned here, but actually had a very big impact on me. So, I came to Stanford in 1950. And to those of you who are concerned about salaries now, my initial salary as a full-time faculty member was either $300 or $350 a month. So my wife, and we had one child. She had worked when I was a graduate student, and I've always been somewhat entrepreneurial. So our income as a graduate student was exactly halved when she stopped working. Coming to Stanford. So we were really in poverty then. Now, I came from a family that had some resources, but we'd had tremendous battles. I was much too independent to bend the knee to my father. It took a long time for reconciliation to take place. But so I independently first started looking for a little more money. And fortunately, I ran into Al Bowker, many of you know, who was a great organizer and creator of the modern mathematical statistics department here, but in general organized what was then called the Applied Mathematics and Statistics Laboratory at Stanford. Well, now it's characteristic of me that I spent my first year in philosophy, and the second year, independently, I moved into the Applied Math and Stat Lab because I felt very congenial there with the characters. But the important thing about that move is Al did look for some money to support me in the summer. Now those were days when money was really scarce. I know there are real complaints now, but it was really scarce then. So he found it in working with David Blackwell and Abe Gershik on their book, Game Theory and Decisions. And that was my real additional education. That was an education different from Ernest Nagel, different from the background from Tarski. This is where I really learned something serious. Now, what was interesting, what I actually worked on, and what joined me in this, some of you, only the aficionados around here, know the name of Herman Rubin. How many people remember Herman? Oh, well, there's quite a few people. Well, Herman was an enfant terrible. We used to have a joke when Herman, how come it took you so long to get your PhD at 19? Well, I had to spend a year in the Army, his response. So Herman was something else. We used to say, his door jams of other people were his office. So both Abe and David, of course, a very well-known probabilist who had a number of great contributions to probability theory. But David didn't like to write in extenso, and Abe couldn't really write in a detailed scientific way, was an enormously experienced and wise statistician. So they were writing this book. So this is the days when O&R had extra money, so they got me to rewrite almost all the formal material in a set theoretical fashion that would satisfy, for example, Alfred Tarski. So it's a little bit too formal, that book, in a way. And Herman had to check everything to make sure there weren't any errors in any of the proofs. So he and I worked together very extensively, and they generously acknowledged this, by the way. But the important thing about it was the effect on me. That had absolutely a tremendous effect of having to get right down into the nitty-gritty of all these questions about game theory and about probability and Bayesian strategies, etc. And that's where I learned a lot. That's my other education. And it's against that background that when I met, not too much later than that, Carnap, that I had been educated by then, hanging around not only the applied math and stat lab doing this work, I had an attitude to probability very different from what was going on in probability and philosophy. And so I had very good discussions. Now, I want to say something wonderful about Carnap that Michael didn't say because he omitted it, but those of you who knew Carnap just had one of the most generous and outgoing personalities possible. Dana, I think you knew Carnap a bit. Now, you agree with me, I'm sure. Who else knew Carnap in his days at UCLA? Maybe not. Duncan, you did?
Jaco.
Huh? Jaco did. Yeah, I'm sure you agree with me, Jaco. Wonderful to talk to. And wonderful conversations. And I was critical, but it came out fairly early, of Carnap's big treatise on probability. It was too much ado about too little. When it came to the subject of probability, I was a bright young man who was talking to Carnap, and I liked it. So I was careful of my criticisms. But he told me then, after we talked a lot, I said, well, in many ways, you're coming at this from the right standpoint. That's the kind of generous spirit of Carnap. I just want to tell this Carnap story. I think you'll find it interesting. He said, von Neumann told me when I was at the Institute, what you should do is go and study how probability is used in statistical mechanics. You'll have a much better feeling for it theoretically if you do that. And he said, I've come to realize that that was good advice, but I didn't carry it out. And now my big regret is that I didn't take more of a turn in terms of my reflections on the foundations of probability. And I think, in other words, what I'm saying is I think Carnap himself, in retrospect, had regrets that he hadn't made his work in the foundations of probability have a more intimate association in relation to the use of probability in the mathematical sciences, particularly in statistical mechanics. And that's, I've always taken that as a kind of, that was a very good response of his and one I very much agreed with. And what I feel, what I'm really wanting to communicate here, how lucky I was to have, I'm really somebody who's been very fortunate and lots of good supporters when young. I got wonderful direction from Nagel. I got great help from everything from Dana, who's younger than me, of course, but which always happy to tell me when I need correction. That kind of correction. And then the work with Gershik and Blackwell and that work. So I've benefited from, I'm one of these people who have been very lucky in benefiting from learning a lot from other people. As I still say, when I give a seminar, really the seminars I tell the students like to, the real purpose of this seminar is to educate me. And that usually happens. I do get educated by the students. So I very much believe in that, but it was especially important. In order to break, I could have come out in a mold that was too philosophical, that is too narrowly philosophical. And so although I'm sort of a dilettante and scatterbrained in a lot of different interests in many ways, as far as I'm concerned, I've benefited from that. I'm one of the persons that has. Now, the second remark, I think this very quick. I wanted to say that. I got a couple of minutes.
You got 10 minutes?
Yeah, you knew if I got it. Yes. So I want to make a remark about Quine. Quine I found very congenial, but I had much more respect for Carnap. I mean, Quine, you see, I think was probably in some sense more able than Carnap, if I had to make a kind of absolute judgment. But Quine really shut down on working seriously. He became a kind of horror philosopher. I mean, and I mean that seriously, because I have great respect for Quine intellectually. And I think it was just too bad that Quine didn't follow the tracks more of Carnap and have greater interest. I think it was too bad for American philosophy. Quine had very great influence and properly had influence. But we've been much better off if Quine had been more willing to dig into the details of the various sciences. And it would have been very useful if his pragmatism, which I very much agreed with the general spirit of, reflected more details of what was going on. So, but those things happen, and that's the way it is. I mean, and Quine remains and should be, as a great American icon of philosophy. And certainly his heart and his head were in the right place. He just sort of filled his head with a little more details of various sciences and commented, because his comments would have been great. What else did I? Oh yes, about that publication of the second volume. Foundation of Innovation. Duncan, where are you? I saw you a minute ago. There he is. Well, Duncan and I agreed to write this 3-volume with 2 younger collaborators, and one of them
We agreed to write a volume.
Huh?
We agreed to write a volume.
We know one volume, right? And it expanded into 2, and because one member sat on the manuscript, not me and not Duncan. After 17 years, volume 2 was a little late. And then when we got to volume 2, there was so much material we had to put out 2 more after the 3rd volume as well. So I wanted to say,
I stand corrected.
well, I'd say my fault. If I were to say my fault, I often publish too soon. I mean, I'm too impatient and send things out for publication. Been better often if I'd sat on them longer.
You waited a good amount of time for representation in the
Yes, I did.
That was just the right
no,
time.
that's different. That I wrote over 40 years. I kept adding things. That's why it's so unreadable now. I put way too much into it. So there's something else you said that I wanted to comment. These are all good comments. I mean, Michael is. I love to disagree with Michael.
Should I say something about Kant?
Yeah, I just think. But I think not. I think that's more than time for me to shut up. I'll have more to say later.